What is my right of way worth and how do I know? So today, members from the AppGeo team and our co-host from Colorado DOT will present a vision for right of way data modernization. And in today's presentation, we'll be focusing on the value of right of way in geospatial databases, how DOTs can garner support for these efforts, and how you can financially justify making the investment to modernize your right of way data. We'll also hear some key use cases and some really interesting examples of how right-of-way is currently being used at DOTs today. So from here, I'd like to do some introductions for today's speakers. We are so lucky to be joined today by Nick Mesenbrink. He is a geospatial analyst with the Colorado Department of Transportation. He's been there since 2012. And in his role, he supports agency staff, stakeholders, and the general public in their use of CDOT's GIS data and applications. He's a graduate of the University of Iowa with a BS in geography, where he concentrated in GIS and environmental studies. And of course, we're also here today with my colleague, Peter Lemack. Peter is a project manager here at Applied Geographics, and he's been working with the company for over 8 years now. In his role at AppGeo, Peter has been the production manager on several transportation projects. With a focus on Meyer, HPMS, and right-of-way, as well as real estate, Peter has helped DOTs enhance their geospatial databases, build out their transportation networks, and implement long-term data maintenance and lifecycle workflows. So you are in capable hands today. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Peter and Nick to kick things off.
Well, thanks, Aaron, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm happy to be here today with you all. So as Aaron mentioned earlier, my colleagues and I, we've worked on a couple of pretty significant right-of-way data modernization projects. First with the Vermont Transportation Agency, and then with Nick at Colorado DOT. Now, additionally, I've spoken and heard from several DOTs over the past 8 years on the GIST circuit about how valuable right-of-way and real property data would be to them, if it was aggregated into a geospatial format. Now, the common thread between these DOTs was that they were unsure of how to start and if they could justify the investment in either human resources as well as a financial budget. And what we're going to discuss today are some of our lessons learned from those past projects, exploring the perceived benefits of right-of-way as well as the realized benefits of right-of-way from Nick's project at Colorado DOT. Now, today's webinar, unlike some of the past webinars that Nick and I have given, it's not going to be a technical how-to for how you go about modernizing a right-of-way. Instead, we're going to focus on our previous projects, how we justify the effort, how we went about identifying a project champion, identified key stakeholders and understood their use cases, and then went ahead and sought to justify that investment financially. So our presentation today is going to be in 4 parts. First, we're going to explore the value or the potential value of right-of-way, what it can bring to your organization. Then we're going to explore the process, how you can start to garner support, understand who your stakeholders are, and how right-of-way can provide a shared benefit to your entire organization. Then we're going to look at a use case on a return on investment study that AppGeo did for VTrans prior to their modernization project. And then finally, we're going to hear from Nick, and he's going to share some of his benefits that right-of-way is currently bringing his organization today. So let's start at the very beginning. Let's explore the potential value of right-of-way and what it can bring to your DOT when it's modernized and brought into a geospatial format. So I always like to start my right-of-way talks with this slide. So right-of-way and real property, as we know it, it's an asset. And it falls into 3 different categories: physical assets, documentary assets, and then informational assets. The first are physical assets. That's the actual land that you own. And the value of that land is equal to the value of the market, as well as your ability to utilize that property. Your next type of asset, your documentary asset, those are your authoritative source documents, be it CAD files, or scanned hard copy, or deeds, and as-builts, and things of that nature. That's really your source information. That describes your right-of-way, and it describes your real estate land holdings. And then finally, we have our informational assets, which is the digitized GIS right-of-way at a statewide level. and it represents the right-of-way, and it provides an easy access to right-of-way information, easy access to your land holdings, and can be shared and used across multiple departments at your organization. Now, in today's presentation, when Nick and I talk about the statewide right-of-way data, we're really talking about a statewide collection of digitized right-of-way data that's linked to the authoritative source documents that is stored in a GIS database, managed in a central data store, and that data store or that platform or wherever you put that information is made available across the entire organization. Now, a statewide right-of-way GIS layer can also mean a couple of other things. It can mean internal process improvements. So when we share the data out across the organization, we can connect to multiple departments. We can connect them to workflows and business processes that not only allow them to use that layer, but also allows them to support it so that it can be leveraged by the organization in perpetuity. A statewide right-of-way layer also means enhanced labor efficiency, either at an individual level or again at like a department level, where you can support someone's daily activities by providing them easy access to information that previously was difficult to find. And then finally, it means an enhanced organizational effectiveness, where you can support a significant process that requires multiple departments and multiple stakeholders required to get the job done. An example of this could be pulling together folks from planning, design, land acquisition, and clearance, leading all the way up to the construction of a new roadway. In all of these examples, a statewide right-of-way is key. So let's kind of explore some value that right-of-way can bring to your organization. So when you modernize your right-of-way, you're really providing a shared benefit across your organization. When we think about right-of-way, we typically start to think about real property. But when we store that data in a geospatial format, when we move it from those deeds or those source documents and share it across the organization, we can now enable various stakeholders to solve their problems through spatial analysis or referencing the easily accessed maps to help answer their questions. So we've spoken with a bunch of folks across the country, and these are just a couple of examples of how right-of-way can bring value to your organization. Talking with folks out west in California and Nevada, thinking about their freight operations and their planning groups. We learned that one of their bigger challenges right now is that trucks, when they're doing their shipping, they don't always have enough space to park along the highway before they can complete their deliveries. And it's causing an issue where they're backing up on routes or they're parking kind of illegally. So if you know where your right-of-way is, if you know where your real estate land holdings that are not utilized, you can then go ahead and make a decision. Do we want to build more truck stops or truck waiting areas? Knowing what your right-of-way boundaries are can also support operational efficiency by directing roadside maintenance and operations like that. And then if we look at a federal level, restoration ecologists at Federal Highway, they understand the value of the 17 million plus acres of right-of-way across our nation's roadways. I listened to a really interesting interview and podcast where a restoration ecologist from Federal Highway was talking about the value of that land in terms of wildflowers and pollinators and conserving vegetation along the roadways. Thinking about our climate issues and resiliency and things like that, understanding your right-of-way could benefit you in that way. There's also a couple more scenarios. The next, you can confirm that your assets are wholly within your right-of-way, and that can support the asset management groups. Again, if we think about using real estate vacant lots to then build truck stops or runaway ramps, such as we've seen in Colorado, understanding where your land holdings are is key. And then finally, if you have land that you've mapped and you've identified that you're not going to use, that could also be used to sell and bring funds back into the organization. So these 6 examples really show how valuable right-of-way can be across many different stakeholders at the organization. Understanding where your right-of-way is, if you modernize it, you can easily answer some key business questions, such as how much right-of-way does your organization own? Is our infrastructure within the right-of-way? When was our land acquired? And one of my favorites is, where is the deed or where is that authoritative source plan located? In many cases prior to modernization, that information was scattered across multiple regions or districts at a DOT, and in some cases on people's hard drives or desktops. So bringing them into one place allows them to answer that question and find that information much more efficiently. Thinking about the property management groups at your organization, when you have your right-of-way modernized, you can ask the initial question, are our real property records complete? Do we have a complete accounting of all of the land that we own? And once you confirm that you do, you can then go on and make clear business decisions, such as, where can we build? Where can we put this runaway ramp or this additional truck waiting area? Or is there land that we're not using that we can then sell? And Nick is actually going to talk a little bit about that later in our presentation today. Thinking on the data management side of things, when we completed the right-of-way project for Colorado, we realized that there were a lot of data management benefits as well. Thinking about some of the activities that you do when you modernize your right-of-way, the first thing, you're reducing right-of-way data silos. You're pulling data from multiple places into one centralized location. And then you're really removing the isolation of workflows across the organization. And what this is going to lead to is an increased data sharing of spatially enabled business information for everyone at the organization. Another activity, when you modernize your right-of-way, you're increasing data stewardship and management best practices that allow you to link the right-of-way source artifacts, those CAD files, those as-built, linking them to the right-of-way GIS outputs, the parcels, the lines, the polygons. And what that really leads to is authoritative and up-to-date data that's readily available for visualization, analysis, and research. Now, there is going to be a shared benefit across your organization. However, with that shared benefit comes the shared investment of resources and time. So as a champion of right-of-way modernizations, if you are someone who wants to modernize your right-of-way and bring that to your organization, it will be up to you to identify the stakeholders across the organization, prove the value of right-of-way, engage with them, get them involved, and work with them to help justify your investment in modernization and bring that up to the higher level management. And we'll talk about that next. So let's talk about how we go about doing that. What is our process of modernization? And again, remember, this isn't technical, but we're really going to stay at a high level with how we can start this effort. So before we get into that, I just want to talk a little bit about our right-of-way solution, the solution that we did for VTrans and for Colorado. So our right-of-way solution is really just a set of activities that leads to a comprehensive data system. Now, right-of-way modernization is going to be a collection of approaches, starting with stakeholder coordination that leads to data processing, lifecycle maintenance, that when you follow them in step and you pull them all together, will deliver you your right-of-way data. Now, AppGeo, we typically bring in a couple of our own tools, but typically we'll incorporate your tools that your organization use so that at the end, you'll be able to go through the process, it will be sustainable, and it will be a repeatable process as well. Now, in the following slides, we're going to review the first steps in the right-of-way solution, identifying your stakeholders, understanding how you can kind of leverage the makeup of your organization, and then how you can drive the modernization effort forward and justify that investment. So how do we lay the groundwork for right-of-way modernization? We've identified 4 key steps in doing this. The first, identify and classify your stakeholders. Next, understanding the makeup of your DOT. Third, catalog the available resources that your organization has. And then finally, 4, consider your strategy and your objectives. So let's start with identifying our stakeholders. Your stakeholders are typically going to be people who either create the right-of-way data, who either use the right-of-way data, or people who need the right-of-way data and can't access it as efficiently as needed. Now, these stakeholders can typically be broken into two categories. The first, your data producers, those who create data, and then your data consumers. And across your organization, as you start to dig in, you'll start to realize that there are a lot of groups within the DOT that at various times will need right-of-way information. Now, before we go on, just pause and remember that the data consumers, they're stakeholders who can really help guide your business decisions, help guide your project along, because you're going to need to understand what data do they need, what questions do they need to answer. And based on that, you can start to frame your project to solve their business use cases. Once you've identified all of your stakeholders, you can start to classify them into those two major groups, your data producers and your data consumers. Now, in many cases, your stakeholders will also fall into the category, that sweet spot of both. They'll be able to provide you information, and they'll also be able to consume the data and will be able to help guide you in your decisions as you set up a project. Now, based on our experiences in Vermont and Colorado, we've worked with folks from roadway design to property management to right-of-way, all the way through the environmental, utilities, and construction groups. Now, depending on your organization, you might interact with different departments and different entities, and they might fall within different categories. But it really is critical that you understand who they are and classify them accordingly so that you can leverage their expertise as needed. In step 2, we're going to understand the mechanics of the DOT. And what I mean with this is all DOTs have an existing organizational structure. There are large operations that typically have their own best practices. They have processes and workflows. And in many cases, they have triggers and processes that you can tap into to help drive your right-of-way project along. DOTs also have different organizational structures. Some are districts, some are regional offices. Some DOTs, headquarters works very well with the different offices. And in some DOTs, headquarters has a challenge working with those regional entities. So the structure of your DOT will impact your modernization efforts. So it's important to understand who all the major players are and where they're located within your state. Understanding the DOT structure can also help answer some key questions, such as where are the data sources? Are your source documents stored in a centralized office, or are they owned at a district or a regional level? Is the data widely shared and accessible across the entire organization? Are there data sharing agreements or policies that make it easy to funnel information to those who are modernizing the right-of-way? And then finally, who's available to support? When we were working on our right-of-way project, we were able to tap into folks in planning, in right-of-way, in survey at all of the regional offices. And they provided an immense amount of information and source documents that helped us drive our project along. Now, in many cases, answering these questions might lead to a direct benefit of modernizing your right-of-way data. If your right-of-way data is sourced in many different places and it's not centralized, modernizing your right-of-way will bring it all into one place. If you don't have data sharing policies, going through a modernization effort will put those in place. It will bring people together. So really understanding the makeup of your organization is going to be key. In step 3, cataloging the available resources. This is really understanding what's available to you. So again, where are your existing right-of-way source document repositories? Are they on special file servers? Are they on a system like ProjectWise? Or are they on someone's desktop or hard drive? And hopefully, if they are, that person hasn't retired or that desktop hasn't been removed. Next, you can start to dig into your organizational resources. Things like, what are your imagery sources? What does your DOT offer? Are there existing geospatial data models? Are there existing business workflows that you can follow? Are there best practices such as CAD standards? And if there are, do they differ at the regional or district level? Do people follow those standards? And hopefully they do. And then you can start to understand, what are your authoritative data formats? What do you have to work with, be it PDFs or DGNs or DWGs, what kind of CAD files you have? And then start to explore the type of budget that you might have available to do this modernization work. And finally, in step 4, we can consider our strategy and we can consider our objectives. Now, when we're modernizing the right-of-way, again, thinking back to our stakeholders, we're really trying to help them answer their business questions and solve their business needs. So your stakeholders are going to define the objectives, and then you as a project champion, you as a person driving the project forward, are going to come up with your strategy, which is comprised of business rules and workflows that are going to help you achieve those objectives. And really, at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is put together a workflow that is scalable, sustainable, and repeatable that allows you to create consistent right-of-way information at the statewide level. Now, over the past 20 minutes or so, we've explored some of the potential benefits of right-of-way, what it can bring to various stakeholders at your organization. We've identified some groups within the organization that would also benefit. So the next question that management is going to ask you when you show them all of these benefits, they're going to say, does the right-of-way modernization provide a business value that is cost justified? And to explore this, we're going to go look at a return on investment study that we did for VTrans prior to their modernization efforts. Now, looking back about a decade, in 2011, there was a major storm on the East Coast called Hurricane Irene. And this storm was pretty devastating as it moved up the coast and actually went inland into Vermont. Now, there was significant damage to a lot of the physical infrastructure and the roadways. And what this led VTrans to start to ask as they went through the process of repairing their roads and trying to remediate the damage was, what land do we own and what do we actually need to repair? And at that time, because VTrans had data in disparate systems and because some of the right-of-way data was missing, it wasn't very accurate, and again, it was in a lot of different places, they did have a challenge answering that question. And that's where modernizing their right-of-way and mapping their right-of-way into a single centralized environment really provided a benefit. So to help justify that, AppGeo put together a return on investment study that quantified their investment in their modernization effort, as well as quantified the business value. So we're going to explore that now. So the return on investment approach that we had followed industry standards, as well as used industry approved formulas to do those calculations. So there are 5 key steps as part of the return on investment approach that again is going to help you justify that investment. The first is identifying stakeholders and gathering input. Sounds very similar to what we presented a few minutes ago. Next, identifying those stakeholders' use cases for their right-of-way. Then calculate the modernization costs and the benefits. Then calculate the return on investment, and then prepare a report and a presentation to upper level management to allow them to make the decision whether or not they want to go ahead with right-of-way modernization. So let's start at the very first step, engaging with our stakeholders. This step allows you to understand who's a data consumer, who's a data producer, or who fits into that sweet spot of both. It allows you to understand what jobs and what tasks rely on right-of-way data, and who should be involved as a stakeholder in that modernization effort. So when we engaged with VTrans, we met with a significant amount of departments and groups within the organization, from the right-of-way chief to the right-of-way surveyors, to environmental policy managers, to highway safety and design. And we even met with some groups outside of the organization, such as the electric and power company. Once we compiled that list of key stakeholders who we knew needed right-of-way data or created right-of-way data, we then interviewed them to identify their right-of-way use cases. We talked to property management, and we learned that if they had data that could allow them to easily identify surplus land for sell-off, that would make their jobs more efficient. We talked to environmental management. If they knew how much of the right-of-way they needed to mow or landscape or log, again, that would make their jobs more efficient. We did the same for pavement management, utilities, and roadway design. And in all cases, if people know where the right-of-way information is, if it's readily available, if it's centralized, it makes their research, it makes their answering questions much more efficient. Step 3, understanding our costs and our benefits. First, we need to quantify our costs. So what's the cost to the organization, the way that we're doing things now, the inefficient way of researching, trying to locate information, trying to make business decisions without a centralized right-of-way repository. First is the investment and the cost in modernizing the data, be it digitizing right-of-way plans or converting CAD to GIS. We can then quantify the benefits, and those benefits fall into 2 camps, tangible benefits and intangible benefits. The tangible benefits I like the most because it really resonates with how bringing information right at someone's fingertips on a map in a centralized environment reduces their time to research right-of-way information, reduces the duplication of effort. For property management, again, we've heard this before, if they can easily find what land they hold, you can increase your income from sales of surplus land. There's also some intangible benefits. Talking with the folks at VTrans, they would always say that dealing with the public, answering the questions that the public have about right-of-way was always challenging because it took a significant amount of time to research and provide an answer. So if you can reduce that time, you're going to improve customer satisfaction and customer service, and the public will be much happier when working with you. Finally, we can get to our return on investment calculations. Now, again, our study used industry standard methods and formulas to calculate the return on investment. The net present value calculation, which is our difference between the present value of the benefits and the present value of the costs, and then our return on investment calculation. So at a very high level, once we understand the costs and the benefits, we can go ahead and generate that return on investment. Now, when we calculate the return on investment, we're really trying to come up with a proportion or a percent value of return. So at a very high level, cutting right to the chase, if our ROI is positive, it means we're going to see a nice return on our investments. If it's negative, we're not really justifying the investment. So finally, we can get to the point, once we've calculated our return on investment, of reporting and presenting to upper level management. Now, this return on investment can help garner executive buy-in, which in turn can lead to organizational change. Now, notice that in both of our VTrans estimates, our high and our low estimates were both showing a positive ROI. Now, when we started the project, the total modernization cost, the estimated cost, was about $2 million. And as you can see, year over year, even between both the high and the low estimates of our ROI calculations, we're showing a positive return. That all the way up to year 5, you're seeing a significant amount of return on that initial $2 million investment. So we're able to justify that actually modernizing right-of-way, bringing it into that centralized location, bringing it into a mapping environment, provides a significant amount of benefit to the various organizations and stakeholders at the DOT. Now, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nick Mesenbrink from Colorado DOT. He's going to talk to you about some of the actual benefits that he's seeing and that his organization are realizing having completed their right-of-way modernization project about a year and a half ago. So Nick, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Yeah, so I guess I was going to talk a little bit about some of the use cases and the benefits. And as Peter mentioned, we finished up our project about a year and a half ago. And go ahead, next slide, Peter. A little history on the project. We initially started off with right-of-way, and we kind of ended up expanding that a little bit to more real property as well, including excess remainder parcels, general ledger, that sort of thing. And one of the main reasons that we wanted to do this project was to investigate potential sales of unused parcels. That was kind of how the initial justification. for the project. And the overall goal was to create mapping grade GIS data for the right-of-way and real property assets, as well as provide authoritative pointers to the documents, deeds, easements, as-built, things like that. And these are kind of the steps that we went through throughout the project, which was about 5 years. We identified, or I should say AppGeo, with our help, identified and cataloged the survey documents. We built up the GIS data sets, mapped the land holdings, the parcels, things like that. And then at the end, middle and end, we established long-term data maintenance processes, which is how do we keep this data up to date? And that's something that we're still working on, kind of fine-tuning, but definitely good to have that in place. And then the last step was using the data for visualizations in our web apps and things like that. Okay, next. Project outcomes. The first one right off the bat was the baseline right-of-way layer of parcels and right-of-way data, also including real property assets, the parcels, easements, things like that. And as well, we wanted to link those authoritative plans to the data so that people could easily find those, as Peter mentioned earlier in the presentation. And then the life cycle plan was something that we wanted to have set and ready to go when the data was turned over to us. So that was a lot of work, but I think we're getting pretty close to having that dialed in. Next step. And this slide is just showing kind of a high level life cycle workflow. And the main thing I wanted to get at with here was the bottom there. We're accessing a lot of different people's time, regional survey offices, HQ right-of-way office, the survey manager, and then the GIS team at the headquarters office, which I'm part of. You can see there's a lot of people involved in this life cycle process and maintenance. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the use cases that we've benefited from with this data. And on the left there, the first one was the electric vehicle planning group used this data really as planning level data for where to possibly put vehicle charging stations and the rest areas and welcome centers across the state. The next one is the internal planning group at CDOT used this data for economic analysis for solar utilities along Colorado highways. And that one is actually just ramping up now. We're really progressing on that this last few weeks here. On the environmental side, we've been working with another sister agency of ours to use the data for low overhead dam analysis in right-of-way and Land and Water Conservation Fund parcel reconciliation. Excuse me. The last one is the environmental water quality group has used the data, again, at a high level to identify possible locations for new water quality facilities. Next, please. And this next one is pretty interesting. It's regarding the Front Range passenger rail, which is an idea that's kind of become pretty hot lately here in Colorado of putting a high-speed rail in up and down the Front Range corridor to try to alleviate some traffic issues. And we have some consultant groups as well as internal CDOT groups that are working to identify the corridors, the possible corridors for that rail line. And this right-of-way data really helped identify corridors that maximize CDOT-owned property and already existing rail lines that are in place. And the data really kind of helped them get a jump start on the pre-NEPA analysis portion of this process, which is a pretty big effort. So it's been helpful. Next, please. And as I mentioned a minute ago, one of the initial justifications for this project was to figure out what we have for parcels for property, and then potentially advertise and sell unused parcels back to the public, which is envisioned as a way to mitigate DOT funding shortages that I'm sure most DOTs are having right now. In order to make that happen, you want to make sure your data is pretty solid and do a thorough QA/QC of it and have a fully implemented life cycle plan so that it is up to date and current. Next, please. And this one is regarding data updates, internal data updates. Our roadway data management group at CDOT previously didn't really have a good way to become notified when there were changes occurring, realignments, things like that. And so they would basically publish their annual data. Somebody would notice that it has issues when it compared to the imagery, or if they knew the project area, they would let them know and they would fix it for next year's update. So if we can kind of tie them into this life cycle process, we're hoping that it'll allow them to be a little more proactive versus reactive to updates on the roadways. And the last one I want to mention is pretty recent here. I don't know if everybody's aware, but there's currently I-70, which is the main east-west corridor through Colorado, is closed due to mudslides and rockfall in Glenwood Canyon out on the western side of the state. There was a large wildfire there last year, and a bunch of rain came through with the monsoons here about a month ago, a couple weeks ago, and did significant damage to that Glenwood Canyon stretch. Knocked out bridges and all kinds of infrastructure damage, as you can see in that photo. So the last week or two, we've had a lot of requests for right-of-way and easement data in that stretch, which has been really nice to have kind of in our hip pocket. Some of the groups that have requested that data are the State Emergency Management Group, U.S. Forest Service, and then the CDOT bridge folks utilized it as well. Next, please. Back to you, Peter.
Cool. Well, thanks, Nick. So as we wrap up with a little bit of time for questions, I just want to say there's 4 main cases here for right-of-way modernization. First, remember that right-of-way in all forms is an asset to your organization, your physical land, your documentary as-built, and your informational digitized right-of-way. Second, you're centralizing your right-of-way data is beneficial to multiple stakeholders, supports many use cases, and extends across the entire organization. Third, the investment in modernization, as we showed with our VTrans return on investment study, is cost justified because of the significant amount of organizational efficiencies that having that statewide right-of-way GIS layer will bring to your organization. And finally, the right-of-way solution, it's a shared endeavor. It takes a lot of people across the organization, but once it's done and once it's maintained, also provides a shared benefit across the organization as well. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for your time today. I hope you enjoyed our presentation. And Aaron, I think we have some time for questions if there are any.
Yeah, I'm just hopping back online here, and the Q&A is still totally open, so feel free to add your questions to the mix as we go through here. We got about 20 minutes remaining. So one question from Dan: will these slides be available after the presentation? Yes, we will have both a copy of the recording, and it sounds like a PDF of the slide deck that we can distribute to everyone in attendance. So thank you for the interest, Dan. And we also have a question coming in from Ben. Could you give us some more detail on how property boundaries were mapped out as part of the project?
Ben, typically what we did, it was really based off of what our source documents that we had to work with were. So we really initially, we tried to start at the most recent documents and work our way back in time to cover all of the roadways. So if we had a CAD file, we would convert that to GIS. We would get in the right projection, and then we would bring that data into the GIS and move it into our data model. If we had as-built or construction documents, we would scale and rotate them as opposed to choosing control points for georeferencing, trying to preserve the scale as much as possible. And then once we had those sheets of a project in the right place, we went ahead and digitized them. First digitizing property lines, digitizing right-of-way lines, access easement lines. And then we would go about a process of actually creating right-of-way polygons, as well as the excess remainder general ledger acquisition parcel polygons themselves. Nick, is there anything else you want to add?
No, I guess the only thing I would add is that, yeah, the initial interest from this was both the parcels and the right-of-way boundary. Slightly different data sets for different groups, but the property management folks are really interested in the parcel side of things and kind of using that GIS data to create like a property management tracking database. They've historically just used Excel for that. So we're kind of, as of now, planning on working with them to create kind of a spatial data set that they can use to track deeds, easements, all that stuff. But then all of that data with all those parcels and easements will combine into one overall right-of-way boundary polygon layer that most folks at CDOT are able to access and use to see some of the use cases that I mentioned earlier. So just a couple different data sets I wanted to clarify.
Awesome. So I'd like to move on. Thank you both for the answers. I'd like to move on to a couple more questions that are coming in. We have Emma just saying hi from the state of Florida, Department of Transportation in Miami. Hello, Emma. We have the distinction of having Boston being hotter than Miami today. So enjoy your cool weather down there. I think she's just saying hi. So here's one coming in for Nick. Who were the key people in the DOT who you had to convince in order to pursue this project? So maybe some of those key people to look out for when you're trying to kick one of these projects off. Who are we going to be talking to?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the right-of-way side of the office was really the driver of this thing initially. It kind of became more of a GIS project towards the end of halfway through the project. But initially it was the right-of-way folks, the headquarters right-of-way office that was interested in this. We've talked about it for years that we don't have any right-of-way spatial data and all the cool things we could do with it. So I guess I would give the credit to the headquarters right-of-way office versus the regional right-of-way offices that kind of took the reins and saw the benefits of this thing.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting, kind of knowing the right people to approach to get started. I'm going to keep coming here because we have lots of questions coming in. So here's one from Dan. He says, do you have separate polygons for each project right away, or are they all stitched together? Or do you have layers which are a combination of both? So that's probably like a GIS data kind of question there. Any comments on that, Peter or Nick?
Yeah, I can take that one. Yeah, so we have both, I guess. Like I said, initially the parcels were digitized, and then those parcels and easements and everything, the individual parcels were kind of, I guess, stitched together or merged together into a right-of-way boundary. So we do have both. We have the individual parcel and easement boundaries, and then we have that overall right-of-way boundary that represents like the total land ownership that CDOT owns. And to clarify too, when AppGeo pulled the data off of these plans, either through DGN or PDF, they pulled the right-of-way boundary and the easements off, but not necessarily indicating that those parcels or boundaries were part of that project, right? If sometimes those CAD files show the right-of-way boundary that was procured 10, 20, 50 years ago, whatever. So that we just kind of pulled right-of-way and parcel data wherever we could get it, not necessarily in the project that it was actually acquired through, if that makes sense.
Any other comments, Peter?
Nope, you got it.
Great. Moving along here. So here's another question, I think also from Florida. The solar panels running along the state road system, is that program a joint partnership coordination with the local power utility company and the state DOT? So kind of multi-agencies, maybe public-private partnerships coming together. Any comments on those type of projects?
Yeah, so this is a really new one for us. We're just kicking that off right now, and we're working with a third party that's kind of helping us do the analysis. Esri is also partnering. I think I can say that. They're helping us kind of get the ball rolling on this. They've done that with a few other DOTs, providing the analysis that basically would showing you the benefits or potential benefits that you would see from some of this. And 5 years ago, we talked about this for many, many years, doing something similar. Having this GIS data is huge because you can actually have some data to plug into your model or your analysis that actually has the parcel data included in it, as opposed to kind of high level, oh, if we had a 20-acre property here, we could do it. But having that real right-of-way boundary and parcel data is kind of what pushed us over to start looking into this.
I know we've seen some cool things where when you add LiDAR into the mix, you can even kind of model the solar, capture for a given area, the shadows from the trees, that kind of thing. So it all works together, and you have to have the boundary to kick off one of those kind of efforts. So really cool stuff in the solar realm. A couple more questions coming in. Does the state's real estate folks have a right-of-way software system that meshes with GIS? So I guess those who are responsible for real estate in a given state, are they able to kind of access this data or look into it, or how do you guys communicate?
Well, right now they don't have anything. Like I said, they've typically just used Excel as kind of their parcel tracking system. I'm sure they have other ways on the back end, but they do not have like a master program that they tap into to manage all this data or assets or parcels or anything. And that's what they're kind of hoping to build with this data, is kind of use this data as the back end, and then build a front end of it that would allow them to track documents, deeds, easements, that kind of stuff. And then obviously have a life cycle system to keep it updated, maintained. Hopefully that answers your question, James.
Sounds like a business opportunity ripe for development there. Here's a kind of related question. How are changes in the right-of-way accounted for? Is there a process for kind of dynamically updating that sort of data? That comes from Efron.
Well, that's part of that life cycle process that we're still, we have it ready to go. We only have about 10 to 20 right-of-way projects that come through a year at most. So we've ran a few projects through, and it seems to work. But right now it's kind of a manual process. The right-of-way, and one thing that's nice about CDOT is that, and I don't know if most DOTs are the same, but all of the local regional right-of-way projects that come through our HQ right-of-way team office in order to get kind of verified and start the acquisition process. So we kind of tapped into that process and got those guys involved. And that was kind of key to having this whole life cycle thing work. So basically, when a new project comes in, we'll get the DGN file, convert it using our DGN to CAD to GIS tool, and keep the life cycle going in that regard. So that's the plan as of right now. But it's definitely not automated.
Thanks for the insight on that. I want to thank everyone for all these questions. This has probably been one of our most active Q&A sessions this year so far. So you guys are keeping Peter and Nick on their toes. Here's one that maybe I'm not sure who it's directed toward, but Ben asks, how many parcels did you end up with, and how long did it take to complete the project? I'm guessing quite a few.
5 years was the project, and boy, I don't. Do you have any idea, Peter?
It was
thousands and thousands.
It was multiple thousands of acquisition parcels that actually represented the land that was within the right of way. There was probably like 200 general ledger properties that we found, some of which don't exist anymore, but that's what property management needs to sort out. And probably like 500 or 600 excess, and maybe another 500 or 600 other remainder properties. There were some projects that we digitized that were pretty old, 40s, 50s, 60s, that did not have parcels identified. It was just the right-of-way lines and the boundaries. So we weren't able to get all of the parcels, but I think we got you guys a pretty good head start on identifying most of them. So
and the property management team, the property management team is currently working on cleaning some of that up too. They have an intern that is cleaning up some of the parcels, identifying the ones that were not processed, and so there's a plan to kind of keep that updated. But yeah, you guys definitely gave us a good start, for sure. And I can tell you right now, I'm looking how many parcels there are. There are 24,000 parcels.
Wow. Quite a lot of data to manage.
Even more than I thought. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, right. I thought it was like 9,000.
Andrew is curious if you know the total acreage of all of that area in some.
You know, I did calculate that at the end of the project because I was kind of curious, and I think I even found an average land cost in CDOT, and I calculated, and it was a lot of zeros. I can't remember offhand.
It might be bigger than the state of well, some of the smaller states out there. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, it was a lot. I don't remember offhand
though. Okay, just wrapping up the last couple questions. Rebecca asks, do you have your right-of-way boundary mapped in line form? So maybe like a polygon boundary. I assume that's one of the data layers you're maintaining that we talked about throughout the presentation.
Yeah, so we initially mapped the right-of-way in a linear format. So we have those lines, and then from that we generated a right-of-way polygon. And then again, we have a linear representation of property lines and easements, which we then went ahead and calculated or created our parcels from. So Nick has both. And Nick, I don't know, are you guys going to maintain those right-of-way lines going forward, or are you just going to focus on the parcels?
Just the polygons and parcels. Yeah, the right-of-way lines, which we kind of call the building blocks of the right-of-way boundaries. Our current workflow is kind of just capture the right-of-way boundary polygon and the parcels and the easements and things like that.